nice that everyone's insulated from the heat. Now, I've been helping out with Poetry Festival Singapore. I think it must be three years now since I moved back on the English subcommittee, helping mainly with youth programs as well as with the biannual monograph, which is a compilation of talks and lectures, the Singapore Literature Conference, which is a biannual conference run by Poetry Festival Singapore. So in the spirit of this venue, I was going to read 2 other poems, which I will, but I'll read an additional poem first, which is inspired by the artist Chua Ek Kay, famously schooled in traditional Chinese painting, but at some point in his practice faced certain limitations in its ability to express what he felt to be the heat and the humidity and the locales present in Singapore. And so his style began to transform as he tried to use those techniques to better capture the realities that he encountered here in Singapore. So this is a poem called The Seasons. The Seasons, for Chua Ek Kay. I could not speak of the seasons, only the tortured tussle of wilting heat and pouring rain. A trained hand captures the scene, yet no longer speaks the language of languorous strokes, perfect for the mist around the mountains and hidden valleys, the unfurling spring blossoms, the gush of falling water, or the sharp leaves of bamboo. No, I could only make the ink crackle like thunder, thin like the drizzle, woven and wound like the sweat on the humid sheets. That's the poem called The Seasons. Thank you very much. So I will say it's quite serendipitous that Chris in this poem talked about burials and afterlives and ancestors. The poem I'm going to read is a poem called Coffers. So on my father's side of the family, they all migrated to the US, and my grandfather passed away about 14 years ago now. He's buried in a cemetery in Houston, in Texas, where land is plentiful. And this is a poem drawing a contrast between that and my experiences of going to cemeteries and wakes and funerals here in Singapore. And one locale that features in this poem is actually the Chinese cemetery at Lim Chu Kang, which is where I had to do a 10 km run once when I was in NS. So it's a coalescing of different ideas, especially the exhumation of many graves and the movement and the cremation of people to, ashes that were placed in urns and are now present in columbaria all over, not all over, but present in columbaria in Singapore and the kind of further out regions from our residential areas. And I think we all know the cemeteries were exhumed so that people could have BTOs. But this is a poem that tries to touch on some of those tensions. It's a poem called Coffers.
This is so fun.
Coffers.
Thank you very much.
Back in Houston, I once laid across my yeye's grave, moist grass upon his casket. It was meant to be a hug, body pressed into the prickling of summer. Our shoes were sloshed by the turrets of sprinklers, one bundle of roses replaced by the next. His headstone was a bench for family portraits. Here, I met death at the bare-faced coffins and void decks and churches and living rooms and sanctuaries, red threads and incense and pulpits and wreaths. Silent prayer burns into memory. They moved once, swallowed into ash, abiding in the urns that line columbarium walls. Their neighbors were ground to dust, scrounged from the earth. Marble tombs split down the middle. Desiccated flesh is a sturdy foundation. Their shadows danced in the dim of new plants. They surrounded me once on a run. The undulating slopes of a cemetery in daylight. We picked the mud from our shoes when the platoon formed again. An army trains for its dead. I trained for my family, for the right to share this space, even if there is more to spare elsewhere. Singapore is a blip in the span of Texas, but memory stretches to swaddle its life. I wonder if someone will hug coffee. Thank you. I would say coming up with music on the spot, responding to the work is no easy task. So on the other hand, I think for our jazz musicians, and I think very much it's kind of improvisational spirit. You know, the 1920s, 1930s in Harlem and New York, the poets would come together, the jazz musicians, and there'd be that interaction, sound, voice, sound of the music. And I would like to think that this is partly in that spirit as well. Share this space that we all share together. So that was from my first book, Going Home. My last poem for you today is from my second book, Bright Sorrow. And it's a poem called Henri Nouwen Sits Beside Me on the Bus. Henri Nouwen was a Dutch theologian I admire very much. And this is about a bus journey I took home from around Tanjung Pagar to home, which is near Holland Village from me. So my last poem, thank you all very much. Henri Nouwen sits beside me on the bus. Or at least I imagine his presence through the stretch of night, exchanging tender chatter down the fading highways, where luminescent yellow and blue take their turns parsing through the glass, and the water droplets slide across my hair, pressed against their other side. We go past the colonnades of the business district, shadows cast over gaggles of cyclists, and the pop and podcasts leaking from pedestrian earbuds. And Nouwen speaks between my fingers, directing this gaze to the momentary assurance of cold fabric, the foraging for old longings, the grip and release of seeing the seats vacant around me. And for a time, he reminds me to form it all into something to hold, to cherish. Then he gets off with me, steps into the blast of a dewy heat, matches the pace of every careful step, and together we walk the weary evening home. Alright, that's been my time.